Hello to everyone. This is Plan C Live. I'm Dale Doherty from Make Community. And today we're looking at the maker response in the UK to COVID-19. And we have a wonderful group of folks that have been involved in that response. And we have a host, Valeria D'Amico, who will guide us through this and introduce everyone today. Welcome, Valeria, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dale, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the panel, and thank you for joining and taking the time to be here and share your stories and experiences in managing different examples of distributed manufacturing networks that have fought the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in the UK. We are delighted to have you here. My name is Valeria D'Amico, and together with Lucia Corsini, we will be moderating the event. Lucia and I are both researchers at the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge, and we are both interested for our own research in various aspects of the work of makers and open hardware communities. Lucia is a research assistant in the design management group, and her research follows how maker spaces and open hardware can support sustainable development and local resilience. While myself, I'm a PhD student in my final year at the Center for Technology Management, and my research lies into how we can turn maker projects into new businesses with the help of local design and fabrication workshops like maker spaces. Today, we will be hearing more about some success stories and examples of how the maker community and the open hardware community in the UK stepped in during the pandemic to join forces and autonomously organize the production and distribution of various solutions useful to fight the healthcare crisis, and coordinating local and regional networks to provide PPEs and other equipment to the health sector and civil society. So before diving into today's presentation, I'd just like to quickly remind you of the format of the session. So we will have a quick round of 8 to 10 minutes presentation from our panelists, starting from Ward Hills, Director of Cambridge Makespace, the community's inventing shed in Cambridge, which has been actively involved in producing protective equipment for the local NHS centre. Then we will hear more from Adam Clark, Marketing Director of 3D Crowd UK, a coordinating platform for the production and distribution of PPEs and face shield for NHS workers. And then we will have finally our two last panelists, Mike McEwen, board member of Shield Collaborative, a cooperative of 13 initiatives for the production and distribution of PPEs for health workers, and Kate Hammer, founder of Cove Sleeves, a project seated within Shield Collaborative, which develops fluid-resistant long-sleeved garments for UK workplaces. And so after the quick round of presentations, there will be time for questions at the end in a Q&A session. And yeah, let me just take once more this opportunity to remind the audience to please feel free to type in your questions if you have some, and we will be keeping an eye on those and share them with the panel at the end. So without further ado, I think, Ward, I leave it to you, and thank you very much, everyone.
Off mute there. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here this evening, and looking forward to hearing everybody else's presentations about what we've learned in the last few months. So, but before that, there we go. I hope everyone can see the screen now. As I say, I'm one of the 6 directors of Cambridge Makespace. So I'll just start off with a little bit of a description about Makespace and then go into what we've been doing for the last few months. But Makespace Cambridge is in Cambridge, UK, a beautiful city, home of Cambridge University also. We're about 400 members, grown considerably in the last few years. We're all volunteer, so we have no paid employees. Everything's maintained by and for the members. Very, very flat membership structure, just one class of member and no business memberships. Everybody joins as an individual. We've been running for 7 years now, and this pandemic and the lockdown was the first time we shut the doors in that 7 years. We've been open 24/7 since then. So it was a bit of a sad day when we shut down, and I have to say we're kind of happy to get stuck in again and get back to work when the PPE crisis hit. We've had a nice history over the last 7 years, and we've had about 1,200 members that we still stay in touch with. And they've been a fantastic resource during the last few months. And the last note about Cambridge is, although we're a makerspace, all volunteer, founded as largely a hobby shop, we also service the business community and have a lot of participation from the business community. And in the last 7 years, about 300 companies have used Makespace in one way or another. Again, they were a fantastic resource in the last couple of months. So to give you kind of a picture of what Makespace looks like, it's a luxurious space. It's literally right in the middle of Cambridge, where space is a bit of a premium. We've got 4,000 square feet, and we've got everything from electronics benches, a couple laser cutters, 6 3D printers, a wood shop, a metal shop, all the things you'd expect in a maker space, in addition to some textiles and things like that. And it's very active. We run courses on how to use this equipment and other almost every night when we're open. But two of our members turned out to have a special place during the pandemic. Their day jobs are actually working in clinical engineering at the local hospital. And the local hospital, it's a poor picture of it, I apologize about that. But that's Addenbrookes Hospital here in Cambridge. And as I say, two of our members are employed in the clinical engineering department there, which is responsible for bringing new pieces of equipment into the hospital. So when the pandemic hit and it became clear mid-March or so that the UK was going to have to deal with quite a bit of traffic into the hospitals and all, and there were going to be shortages in certain areas, the Makespace members were quite keen to participate and help out in any way they could. So rather than just going off and doing what we could, we decided to contact the hospital and our members who work there and find out what we should be doing. What were their needs, and how could we help in the most efficient way? And in those days in mid-March, their needs were very uncertain. They didn't know what they were going to need. This is the time period where China was kind of on the wane as far as new cases. Italy was still going up as far as new cases. It was going to hit the UK pretty soon. Everybody was preparing, but they weren't quite sure what they needed. And the list of things that they needed ranged from oxygen supplies to people just to commission new equipment and bring it into the hospitals. They needed control systems for oxygen distribution systems and ventilators and things like that. There was a lot of talk about creating open source ventilators, spare parts for them, customs fittings for this and that. All these things were being tossed around as things that the hospital might need, but honestly, they didn't know themselves what they might need. So after several conversations with them, we found out that one of the things that they did need was PPE. And they had identified a design for PPE that was open source. It was created by some good folks in Wisconsin called the Badger Shield, done by Delve Design. And it fit what Addenbrookes thought they were going to need. It was functional. You could make it out of consumer off-the-shelf materials, so it was quite accessible. And we thought it was quite manufacturable. It was certainly designed to be manufacturable. There were very large questions, very outstanding large questions from the hospital about whether a makerspace could provide these two standards that the hospitals could accept. The hospitals had on order, or potentially on order, very, very large volume deliveries of various types of PPE, but those weren't going to be available for some weeks in the future. So the question the hospital put to us was, could we, as a local makerspace, create this design in sufficient volumes to bridge the gap between where we were at the moment, when they needed thousands of these a day at Addenbrookes. Addenbrookes, to give you an idea, it's about 10,000 staff and about 150,000 patients a day. So it's a fairly big place, about 10% of the UK hospital activity. So, so the question was, could we produce it to standards that they could allow into the hospitals? So for a UK hospital to use PPE, it has to be CE marked and regulatory approved. Could that be done in the workshops? And so that's really what kicked off this project, was a prototyping of a process to produce a CE markable visor that could be used in the hospitals. So, so we set off on seeing if we could prototype a manufacturing process that could meet those standards. And we did the standard whiteboard session, and we took a look at different jigs and processes and materials flows and all that. We called up our members who work in the various companies around Cambridge, and the initial people we brought in were tool makers. They were people who made other devices that made other devices. And we put them on putting together jigs for the visors. We put them into putting together a production facility, and you can see the taping out lines so people kept the social distancing and all of that. We also looked at sourcing materials, and you see this big roll of plastic here. The plastic was a continual problem. It needed PET plastic. It was a continual problem throughout the entire project. And it was largely solved for at least weeks during the project by the observation of one of our members that the same plastic that we needed for the shields was also the same type that was used by a local bakery to put on the top of their boxes. You know, the little clear box that, or the clear window that you have on top of a fancy cake box. He realized this was exactly the same material we needed. So we called up the company, and they essentially donated a very large roll of the PET plastic that we used for almost the entire project. And that was a kind of a continual theme through the entire project, was because our members were members of the local economic community and worked at their day jobs in local businesses, they knew where the resources were that we needed, and they had the relationships, they knew how to buy things, they knew how to anticipate lead times, they knew how to recruit people and to train people. All of these day-to-day skills that the people used in their normal economic life proved absolutely invaluable in putting this together. And in the end, we had over 200 people help us out with this in various ways. So so essentially, we came in, and on a Monday we started laying out the makerspace into a place that could be turned into a manufacturing facility. And because we needed to stay 2 meters apart from everybody, we taped the entire thing out with one-way systems and lots of arrows this way and that way, and removed all the chairs, or at least half the chairs, so people couldn't sit next to each other. Taped everything out, and that was on Monday. By Wednesday, we had people going through the process of actually putting the visors together. By Wednesday afternoon, we were actually producing visors. On Thursday afternoon, we had a wall of visors. That's about 1,000 visors. And you can see these are open because we were even running out of some supplies. We had to wait before we could box things up. Net result was a month or a week after we started on one Monday. A Monday later, we had 1,000 visors put together, which was the original goal of the project. And that was enough to prove that the system worked. They went off to the hospital for quality assurance and quality control, essentially to make sure they met standards. And we were quite happy that they did. The hospital was quite pleased with them. So in a week we made 1,000, and then a couple weeks later we had made another 4,700 of them. And it was an odd number because we simply ran out of materials at that point. and we were able to distribute the latter 4,700 to local community organizations, schools and care homes, homeless shelters, places like that. And we really took the philosophy early on, or the strategy early on, that although we'd supply hospitals when we could, we wanted to distribute to the community as much as possible, because we're basically a community organization. We are a community organization, and we wanted to support those people who supported us, and they were the volunteers who were producing them. So we wanted to make sure the community had them. So net result was we distributed almost 6,000 visors all across the east part of the UK. And just to give you an idea of the scale of this, this is a 2.5-hour drive from the coast to Cambridge. And we actually had people from the emergency room over in Great Yarmouth and down here in Colchester and Ipswich driving 2 and almost 3 hours to come pick up the visors because they were getting that desperate for them. So so it was great demand, but we distributed mostly around Cambridge here, say community organizations and all of that, to care homes. And this is actually a person working in hospital down here. I think it was in Bedford or something like that. So so quite successful there, and quite proud of what we were able to do there. And let's see. But the real result of what we had was because we were working with the hospital so closely, we did everything to hospital standards, and we were able to actually create a technical file that was of the quality that could be CE marked. For other reasons, we never had to CE mark this particular process.
But what is CE mark? What is CE?
It's the regulatory approvals.
Okay.
So it'd be like FDA approval in the States.
Okay.
Yeah. So so it has to be CE marked to be able to be used in a NHS hospital, in a National Health Service hospital. So we put a technical file together, and that was what was approved within the week of us starting, and then allowed these visors to be used in the NHS hospitals. We then published that up on GitHub, so that any other makerspace in England or anywhere in the world really could use our process to make visors to our standards. So the idea was not necessarily to make visors, but also to make a process that would support other people making visors. So the outcome was essentially that the hospital was able to promote our visors, and then then provide that to other local manufacturers. In this case, Myers and Charpak. They used our procedure to produce visors, and they went from our thousands a week up to 250,000 a week. And for several weeks, they were producing 250,000 and a week, and then supplied both England and Wales with visors. So all that worked rather well, but we ran out of supplies to make visors, so we kind of had to move on to other things. And in our interaction with the hospital, they had told us that mask clips, these little things that sit behind a doctor or nurse's head that holds the mask off the ears, we were able to design one really quickly, and in a couple of days get that approved by the hospital. And in the end, we made 200,000 of those in Makespace itself, and then again passed off the procedure to 2 companies called Charpak and Furstan, and they went on to make a very large number. I actually lost track of how many they made, but several million of them, that primarily for the local hospitals and all of that. So we use this same process of taking advantage of the commercial experience and the manufacturing experience of our members, and we decided to keep prototyping processes that would be useful. So we did a second project, mask clips. Yeah.
Ward, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're running a little bit tight on time. So yeah.
So I'll just finish up. We went on to do masks that we're distributing to the local community that they can make themselves. And essentially the takeaway for all of this was we focused very local on our local community and serviced the needs we knew existed. We acted like a professional manufacturing facility from the outset, documenting things as much as possible. And it was really our people that allowed us to do that. And it all started because we started with the hospital, understood what they wanted, and worked backwards from that to the manufacturing and the production. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ward. That was really interesting. I'll hand it over to Adam very, very quickly. Thank you.
Turn myself off mute. Ward, it's actually amazing how similar but yet so different we are. There's so many things there where I was like, oh, that's like, and so many things that was like complete opposite. So it's really quite fascinating. But thank you for that. Hope you find this as well. So something I work in marketing, so of course I'm going to add some buzzwords. But how we built a decentralized Amazon of face shields in only 4 weeks. It's really quite a remarkable story, and when I think about it, it still does sort of make me well up a little bit. A bit about me: I joined 3D Crowd at the end of April-ish. I can never remember quite when it was, just as I was actually furloughed. I've basically been the volunteer marketing director ever since. I offered 2 hours of my time. I ended up, yeah, the rest is history. Seems like about 6 years in normal time, sort of pre-COVID. It's been a very crazy experience, but obviously very fulfilling, worthwhile. The strangest thing for me personally, and for anybody else in business, is you want to succeed, to get more orders, to raise more money, etc., but everyone at 3D Crowd wanted the crisis to go away, the traditional PPE supply chain to kick in and take over. So we were no longer needed. We knew we were an emergency service that was filling the gap until these things were sorted. So it was, from my perspective and many others, it was quite a weird situation where we wanted to be self-destructive in a very positive way. And yet we're still distributing to this very day, but nowhere near the numbers that we were before. So basically, 3D Crowd started from, we could print some of these, some face shields, comment on a website, essentially. And we turned very quickly into this. And apparently this is pretty much everyone's profile picture on Slack. There's about 8,000 people who signed up. Not all are active, of course not, but it's a fantastic achievement. During this time, we have people who don't 3D print, but they greet new members and tell them what the rules of the road are to use Slack, and which groups they should join, and various other things, where our wiki and our SOP, and where the printer guidelines are if they're a printer, and what printer they've got, and various other things, so they can quickly find their way and navigate around both Slack and the community, and get printing very, very quickly, or at least then. So it's absolutely fascinating. I've got a little video which I'm going to share. This was made by one of our community members, Richard. I'm not going to play all of it. It is available elsewhere, but it just gives you an idea of what we achieved. If anyone wants to check his maths, they're more than welcome to. I haven't. I trust him. So you get the idea, but oh, there we go. We use the Prusa RC3 splash shield design because it was already approved by the in the Czech Republic. So that was the sort of the path of least resistance, perhaps, and the one that we felt, you know, we, again, all walks of life. We've got, you know, people who run professional 3D printing studios and have already applied for CE marks and that sort of thing. So it was very clear to them. Obviously, I wasn't involved at the time, so I don't have the exact history, but that this was probably the one that would be most likely to be approved and get a CE mark in the UK. So that's obviously where they went with that. And it's something we did very, very early on, not knowing how long this would last or how big this would become, was to apply for a CE mark. And that's something we've been proactively aiming for, and it's allowed us to carry on distributing far longer than many other smaller 3D printing communities that are basically doing the same thing, which is unfortunate, but it's something that we have to adhere to. So you just get an idea here. Here's a map of where we distribute to. If you zoom in, you'll notice that Cambridge had absolutely none, obviously, but I jest. But you can see here sort of the absolute scope. We did John O'Groats to Land's End pretty much. At its peak, we had 90 decentralized cleaning and distribution hubs, the bulk perhaps being in sort of London, but also in the Midlands. We had 13 regional coordinators and then 200 other coordinators as well. This is like in the space of 4 weeks, absolutely insane amounts of ramp up. And then, you know, if you think about where we are now, it's nothing like to this level. You know, 600,000 face shields ordered in 5 weeks. We didn't print all those. Some of those orders, we were very lucky to be able to pass them on to other organizations that could fulfill that, you know, so we weren't something where it's like ours, you know, we're going to try and do everything. We knew that wasn't possible at all. Loads of obviously press mentions, international, national and regional. I think everyone has seen at least 5 or 6 articles or TV shows where there's a person in their room making a 3D mask over the past 3 or 4 months. And the news cycle sort of fell in and fell out of this very, very quickly. But we've been lucky to feature on BBC Click and Wall Street Journal most recently. And then we've raised 160,000, but that doesn't include the regional funds that we've raised, the personal contributions. Many people 3D printing without necessarily knowing whether we'd be able to have the money to give it them back. So there's some huge personal sacrifices, and thankfully, for the most part, we've been able to do that in either filament or actually monetary, because we've somehow managed to balance the books for the most part. You can see here as well, the demand was so crazy that it goes off this chart here as well. And you can obviously see that when we had the big print, which was the big initial push, that allowed us to get the orders in, to set up the regions, to put all the, to start putting the procedures and the SOPs and various other things together, the structures, how the flow. We have an agreement with DPD, for example, and various other organizations that helped us distribute them. And we had our own people who blagged or ran around the country in their cars to deliver these. So we were very, very lucky to be able to do that. You just look at the amazing help we've had from many, many businesses, some big, mainly the big ones I've put on here, but there's lots of smaller ones as well. Have just been amazing in helping us, whether with regional hubs or with 3D printers, or giving their employees and empowering their employees to use company equipment or their personal equipment and supporting them. Lots of things that's happened there, and it's just phenomenal to see businesses support their employees and support our efforts. Because we were born out of COVID, essentially, our only purpose has only ever been to supply face shields. Very, very one-dimensional. What happens when you get to the end of that and demand starts to run out? We're based on community, very, very much. Not everyone's a 3D printer, but that's where most of our people are passionate and hobbyists and experts. So we've built the future of 3D crowd based on 3 core pillars. And I won't go through all this, but you can kind of see here where we're starting to head, and what we're trying to do is trying to look at crowdsourcing this decentralized production facilities into other things. So making static limbs for children is one of them, 3D printed home aids for the elderly and disabled, face shield for frontline care home workers. A lot of their revenue has sadly disappeared because a lot of their residents have died. So while people obviously, think they're flush with money, perhaps it's not quite the case in a lot of cases. So we're still getting a lot of orders, but not on the scale from care homes that are obviously struggling for with that cash flow, etc. So that's basically doing what we were doing before, but a bit more targeted on the care home sector. And obviously we are sort of sat waiting in case there's a second wave, in case we're needed again. Hopefully that either there won't be a second wave or the manufacturing will be in place that we're not needed, but fingers crossed. Another one is we're supporting other COVID related things, which basically means we can double the amount of people that can use ventilators. So this is one example here. And we had one of the examples of where we're going is we had 3D crowd talks. One of our coordinators said, can I do talks over 2 days, maybe about 14? And I was like, yeah, go for it, fine. And he did it, and we absolutely amazing. Over 1,500 people watched about 600 hours over the 2 days. He did a great job. I was like, do you want to do it again next week? And he said no, but absolutely fantastic, the community. And obviously they've printed things like t-shirts as well, to so people can buy t-shirts to remind themselves of the amazing efforts. This is Andrew from Hackney who sent me this today, so I could show you guys. And then also what we're doing is we're looking at recycling, how we can deal with the recycling problem with 3D printed waste as well, and what can be done with that. And we're also looking at other projects like 3D printing coral reefs and that sort of thing. So there's lots of projects that we're starting to look at as an admin team, but also as a community. Everyone's a volunteer, no one gets paid for any of this. And so certainly myself feels like a custodian of this until it becomes what it decides to become in the future. And that's the whistle stop tour. I think I've hit 10 minutes ish. It's incredibly difficult to go into what 8,000 people across the UK have managed to do in the detail that is deserving of them, but that's relatively high level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That was also very, very interesting and insightful. I'll hand it over to Mike and Kate for the final discussion, and then we'll move on to the questions and the general discussion. Thank you.
Hey, over
good evening, and I will give a brief introduction on SHIELD. My name is Mike McEwen. I'm a veteran of the medical device world. I work with innovative startup medical device companies and offer consulting advice to them. And it was through that route that I actually got involved with one of the starter groups called NHS Hero Support, which is where I met Kate Hammer. SHIELD, the SHIELD Collaborative, and SHIELD stands for Sustainable Hub of Innovation, Execution, Launch and Distribution. And is a group that has got an aim to get emergency PPE into the hands of those that need it, be they healthcare or key workers and key worker communities. And this group has come together, and it consists of a group of other volunteer groups, my own group and Kate's group, NHS Hero Support, moved hundreds of thousands of items of PPE in and out of China and got it into hundreds of locations. Other groups involved in SHIELD, we have the Heroes Doctors Group, we have another doctors group called Med Supply Drive, we have the Makerversity in London, Helpful Engineers, National 3D Printing Society, Contractors Appeal, Women in 3D Printing, Do Some Good, the Sewn Group, which is producing scrubs. The NEED group is a logistics group that normally serves the construction world. That group, on behalf of the SHIELD Collaborative, has moved over 1 million items of PPE to thousands of locations, maybe in a collaboration with Parcel Force. The Helpful Engineers group in SHIELD went through the full C marking for their Visor project. I'm on the board of Shield along with the doctor who leads the Heroes group, the head of the Contractors Appeal, a ICU consultant, and the head of Helpful Engineers. And one of the major projects now going forward is led by our very own Captain America, Kate Hammer, who has looking at this innovation part of Shield. So I'm going to hand over to her, and then I'll come back to what we are going to do in the future once Kate has explained her amazing work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike. I'm going to try to keep to time. So the project I lead is now called Care Sleeves. And as these garment labels might indicate, we are taking the finishing of our garments quite seriously. We are currently working on prototype series 2.1 of a range of garments that will provide care workers in our care sector with long sleeves. And the inspiration for Care Sleeves came from a meeting that Mike and I attended with 4 others in early April that identified a very clear gap in the PPE guidelines in the United Kingdom, which was that only certain clinicians were being accorded sleeved garments. And that guideline had very little recognition for the reality of intimate caring and how close one grows. Now, we didn't have the science that is now being described by the, I think it's 239 doctors addressing the World Health Organization this week about how likely it is that this pathogen is airborne. But many, many other countries put into place guidelines to have arms covered, and the UK did not. And specifically, PPE has never existed in the care sector. So that's where we chose our challenge. The thinking for this was possible because of the umbrella that the Shield Collaborative provided. And Lucia, I know that you wrote in late March about the importance of conversations with clinicians. And above all else, I think that is what Shield Collaborative enabled. I adopted a principle of looking for substance and not standing within that community. And I was able to start conversations with the materials scientist from University of Glasgow, with a junior doctor who's a fantastic dot connector, and with a service designer from Helpful Engineering. And those people became the core team for Care Sleeves. This is a bonkers slide, and it's bonkers by design, because this is, I know it doesn't compare to the magnificent display of Adam's 8,000 faces. But when you're innovating a product with no clear roadmap, it's actually great to have a number of people who you could possibly get around a pub table. There are a range of organizations that are publicly supporting and engaged with our work. The 2 words on this slide that are most important to me as the project lead are the word anthropologist, which I'll speak about in a minute, and the term costume supervisor. I did not know, but I soon came to discover that costume supervisors are extraordinary project managers, and they are used to going from a blank piece of paper to creating an entire world of garments in something like 12 weeks. And our costume supervisor, Natasha McMurdy, who was at this point in time on furlough from the English National Opera, had already built a Scrubs hub, and she was looking for her next design challenge. And she has taken an incredible lead in marrying the requirements of care workers with the demands of garments as structures. In terms of the kind of ethos for the project, we've considered excellence looking in 2 directions. In one direction, we look towards user acceptance, and in the other direction, we look at the limits of materials, and that's why the material scientists on the team play such an important role. In terms of the people we hope will work well wearing our garments, the anthropologist that I mentioned on the previous slide is actually also an expert in infectious disease control. And she's worked on infectious disease control projects now on 3 continents, though she is very young. And she built a discovery team to have in-depth qualitative conversations with carers to identify the physical demands that their garments experience, but also what their relationship is, both to the garments that they wear and to the residents and patients that they care for. And so using the insights, we were able to eliminate a number of possibilities. And this is, these are drawings of series 2.1 and series 2.2. And we call them garments because really the garments that we're creating are not gowns. They function in some of the protective ways that gowns accord, but it's very important for carers that they not feel over medicalized. And the purpose of the 2 colors in each of these drawings is that we're combining 2 textiles. This is the technical fabric that we're using, which our partner in the automotive industry has made available to us. And you can see how water resistant it is. When our lead of testing, Dr. Pete Milan at iForge, tested this, he came out of the shower quite dry. The care workers told us, however, that the temperatures are really, garments have to be breathable for them. So a garment made entirely of the technical fabric will be too hot, but it's incredibly robust. It performs really well. And that's why we've chosen to combine that as an applique with a far more comfortable polyester. Just gonna try to get my videos to stop so I can advance my slides. God bless technology. And we've tested this. Here you're seeing a tea test and a coffee grounds test with Clinell wipes, which are widely available in care homes. Because with a long sleeve garment, which carers are traditionally never wearing, it's important for them to know that they can wipe themselves clean. And that's what the technical fabric affords. Whoops, same problem here. We've decided to start small and to make sure that we're building garments that people want to adopt before we seek certification. So series 2.2 is actually being stitched. It's not being welded, although we have confirmed that the 2 fabrics we're using can have welded seams. And we're going to aim to get both of the fabrics approved before we then search for our final production partner. But we've got people on the short list for that. In terms of some of the things that we've overcome, there was a great rush, particularly under the SHIELD collaborative umbrella, to race to solutions without, in my view, properly scoping problems. And so it was very important to define a different kind of problem-solving space where we could take time to identify what the needs were for a neglected sector and then bring the right kind of discovery methodologies in place. There was also the risk of premature convergence, going for quick solutions rather than the right solution. And finally, there's always the risk when you're working with a volunteer team, particularly people who've never met face-to-face, that we're going to experience friction and fragmentation. And so we worked hard on our styles of communicating, the kinds of conversations we hold, the number of questions that we asked to help people really feel connected. In terms of the barriers that we have not yet overcome, some of the logistical things that we face, it is not possible at any kind of speed now to open a bank account in the United Kingdom. And so a number of the organizations that didn't have pre-existing banking facilities are still waiting to have bank accounts opening. We've got some clever workarounds for that, but that does limit our ability to do fundraising at the moment. And it puts an extra burden on our institutional partners in terms of helping us process payments. Another barrier is that a great many of the talented people are on furlough, and organizations coming off of furlough have typically been very bad at communicating, and that creates a lot of stress and question marks. I think I'll hand now over to Mike for the future of SHIELD.
Thank you, Kate. So the future of SHIELD, the estimate today was that by November we would have 70,000 deaths. We're heading for a second wave. That is the prediction of everybody. There was a paper and information presented out from the government about the lack of PPE and the strategy for PPE in the UK. So there's a belief that the role of SHIELD is still going to be there. One area we've really sort of scotched over a little bit here, there's two areas. One is the emergency imperative that governs the regulatory framework in which we can have this innovation. As the head of, or the person that was given the role of looking after the legal side for all of this emergency creativity, that has, the government has actually tightened up the ability to put into place under a waiver, a legal waiver, to try to protect on a legal framework. As somebody that works in the development of medical devices, the regulatory framework is an imperative to protect the people manufacturing, but also to protect the people who are receiving. So that is something which I think we will all have to address, including SHIELD. But SHIELD will continue to do this innovation. One of the projects we're looking at the moment is, can we do knowledge transfer to less able parts of the world? So we are through and in conjunction with 3D printing, female 3D printing groups into the global south, and also helpful engineers who have bodies in other parts of the world. So we're looking at taking that knowledge transfer, the things that Kate perhaps may come up with, and other groups, so that we can provide value and fulfill our goals, which is to get emergency PPE to places that need it, and offer a global service. But our priority is to the UK, and we are fantastically grateful for all of the people that have been involved.
Mike, we should chat too. We're having similar conversations. So, and I know that there are conversations going on with Shields, but have probably stalled a little bit. So let's see if we can work again together. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, Kate. I think all the presentations were super insightful and interesting. And I think if there's not questions yet from the audience, I would like to kick off with one for the panel. So some of you mentioned already this aspect, and I was thinking, so in face of some of the challenges that you faced throughout this process, if you were to do this again in light of a second possible wave, what do you think, what additional support do you think you would need to overcome those challenges, and what would you do differently?
May I step in, because it relates to my last point? I would say that we would need to partner with some of the regulatory bodies that would in a way join our communities. They have a role to play. Luckily, I have some personal contacts in the regulatory world which came in very, very handy. I won't say anything more than that, because I was given advice which is I had to have, there was some sensitivity, but that to me has been one of the biggest issues with the 3D printing community, the use of designs and the ability to get them through what the regulatory framework actually is.
Adam, do you want to respond to that point? Managing a distributed team of 3D printing across the UK.
I probably agree with what Mike is saying. And we've had similar discussions, perhaps even with the same people. But I think one of the amazing things at the time when we span up so quickly was, things like furlough, people being able to spin up very, very quickly, pulling together that energy, that drive, that determination to solve this one singular problem. Obviously, the world, the economy, people's mental health, all sorts of things are in a different place than they perhaps were then. So as a community, I can't put words in their mouth, but there is a determination. If there is a second wave and there is demand, we will do our best to meet it. But probably, you know, we raised 160,000 plus and more besides. But the real figure was probably, you know, total spend was probably close to 400,000. A lot of that was you know, personal donations. Can people do that again? We are lucky, of course, that we've done a hell of a lot of research in the market, that we're able to potentially use different types of production techniques to solve the problem. But that, again, we're solving the problem, but we are going away from 3D printing to injection molding and various other things. But again, with, you know, CE approval and various other things, hopefully, touch wood, coming very, very soon, we'd be able to do that. And again, going to what Mike was saying about sort of around the world, we're getting requests from countries around the world that are at different stages of this pandemic about, yeah, we're actually looking at providing our tech stack to organizations similar, so they could potentially run a 3D crowd out there. So there's all sorts of things that are potentially happening, and we are trying to prepare. We've not sort of just said, right, it's over by, you know, we're very mindful of that, but we're also trying to give people a bit of a rest and a break as well, because that's really quite important. So there is lots of conversations going on. We're not, you know, but it's tough. It definitely is.
Kate, would you like to add anything about?
Yeah, where we are with our product timeline, we're still prototyping. We expect batch production to be starting in the autumn, and we are expressly looking for ways to make this a sustainable business and not necessarily one that we own. So it's entirely possible that the Care Sleeves project team, such as it's configured now, becomes more of a marketing wing, connecting the care homes with whom we've created relationships as part of our discovery process with the industrial producer of the garments. We're also very interested in laundering, because we're committed to reusable, and to perform safely, there are going to be laundering conditions in relation to the garment. So there could be quite a lot of process redesign within care homes themselves in order to make our product range truly useful. And that has to be financially viable for care homes and for laundering services, even if it's not financially beneficial for us as a team, because we just want to solve a problem. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Ward, what do you think, like, Makespace has learned specifically from this experience?
Well, I can answer that one, but also to address your first question about what's needed to facilitate this in the future. I think all of these examples have shown that we are very capable as a community of makers around the world of producing quickly and efficiently some fantastic innovative products, and we can do whatever's asked. I think to smooth this, maybe in the second wave or in future challenges, is to look at the supply side. Sorry, the demand side of things, not the supply side, the demand side of things. So regularizing what actually is needed to define better the questions that we are trying to answer. What kind of PPE is necessary? To what standards does it need to be approved? What will work? What won't work? These sorts of things. And then also just in the supply chain management end of things, to know who needs what, and to have some sort of a smoother or more transparent management of the demand. Several times during the process, regulations changed about what needed to be regulatory approved, CE marked, or what didn't need to be approved. And we actually delivered visors to other NHS hospitals that had been approved by Addenbrookes Hospital, but because it had been approved by another hospital, this second hospital wouldn't accept it. Because they didn't know they could, and we had to cite the regulations to them so that they could actually accept it. Later on, another regulation changed, or another guidance changed for the care homes, and face shields were recommended for care homes. In that same day, I had people calling me from individual care homes and the corporate office of those care homes asking for PPE. So we had each individual care home wanted 2,000 visors, and then the corporate office wanted 10,000 visors. Well, actually, they were asking for the same visors twice, but they didn't know that, and they didn't have the internal communication systems set up for very good reasons. This hasn't happened before. So the demand sometimes looked like it was many more times larger than it was. And that really distorted things, and I don't think things were done as efficiently as they could be. So I think clarity of what needs to be delivered would help, and then clarity of who needs what at what time. Some transparency in the supply chain would really help.
Yeah, I echo what you said there, Ward. We had similar issues.
One of the things that I think was really common to all of your projects was that you all managed to establish really effective collaborations. And I'm interested to what extent you were leveraging your existing social networks or versus building new relationships. And if it was the latter, how did you do this so quickly, and how did you establish your legitimacy? I don't know who wants to take this first.
I'll go first. My best friends right now are people I've never met and didn't know 3.5 months ago, 4 months ago. I'll be honest with you, mainly because they're the people I've spoken to the most. And that's not just the admin team, that's people I've met that we've done Meet the Maker interviews with, the press have wanted to speak to, or just generally asking information into the community about what's the best angle to do this, should we do this, should we do that, and then just having those conversations. It's just been, phenomenal. And I'm also quite lazy when it comes to staying in touch with friends, but it's been amazing, especially kind of through LinkedIn, the amount of contacts that have just come to me and said, what do you need? Do you need help with this? Can we help with that? What's going on? Why have you changed your role? This sort of, that and the other. That's been absolutely amazing. A good friend of mine sort of noticed that I was doing this event. He's like, look, do you want a pep talk beforehand? Let's go through some of the things I've learned doing like 200 of these things. And I was like, great. So he's going to probably watching this now and give me loads of feedback afterwards. So because I'm not very technical, and you probably noticed it from the presentation, I've been trying to tell the story to the people out there, and 99.9% of the population aren't very technical either, but they understand the need, the values, and what's being delivered, and been trying to tell that story, but stay true to the makers as well at the same time, that there's still an element of, the techie, interesting stuff that gets them through a day and keeps them passionate. So it's been very difficult to do that, but I couldn't have done half of the things that I've done. Most of the social media has actually been user generated content. It's not been necessarily content that I've made, which I'm very lucky to be able to amplify that with the platform, because there's people willing there across sort of 8,000 signed up, but maybe 2,500, 3,000 that were active generally day to day. Music video. There's a music video that some guys are literally releasing any day now as well. So, bonkers things going on as well. So being involved in that, not singing, thankfully, but being involved in that and seeing that grow, and some of the other projects has just been fascinating, and it's all based around community and that drive to work together. Without, nothing would have happened without it. So there you
go. I'd like to. I mean, I'm looking at the screen because I'm looking at Kate, and I didn't know Kate. right at the beginning of this, and I didn't know any of the group that Kate is involved in, and through this, it's just been an explosion. And what it said to me is the latent talent of virtually the entire population of the planet is phenomenal. And I think there were people doing things that they didn't actually know that they could do. And I think that's a phenomenal effort. It's my own personal network, having worked in the med tech world for so many years. There's an enormous variety of people that had some expertise around this area. But what astounded me was the people like the network that Kate had, the network that Elisa Pearlstone had, that Paul Ford had. This 7 degrees of separation aspect. And I think one of the key things that I would like to see get sustained here is the way actually these communities maintain themselves, because it's very easy to go back to it's all about your problems and things like that. And I think there's an opportunity at this particularly bad time for all of these groups to think about working in a different way. I think this innovation going forward could be transformational if leveraged and messaged in the right way. And that's certainly something I'm taking away from this, and looking to see whether, taking an hour of somebody's time to solve an intractable problem, how do you effectively do that? And I think everybody on this call and everybody listening suddenly realizes, you might go to your dad, you might go to your mate, you might go to somebody on LinkedIn to solve that one problem. How can we do that more effectively?
Yeah, it's just going to add, it's like a networked model versus a hierarchical model of, how a lot of organizations are organized. If I just make a comment, Ward, I thought it was really fascinating that, you took like an open source design and you created an open source manufacturing process documentation. That is, for a group of people to make something, as opposed to, in the 3D printer world, it's just like I get the design and I just print it myself and figure that out. But this sort of group process and having that documented and shared, I think is a really novel and interesting approach.
Yeah, we realized earlier on that we essentially have a room that isn't a manufacturing facility,
right?
And we can turn it into a pseudo manufacturing facility, but it always was going to be limited. So we just asked ourselves, what is the what's the best way we could leverage the value of not just that room and the tools that we had, but also the experience of the room. And it is a very flat structure that we ended up doing, and we ended up with that largely out of necessity, that none of us had the complete picture and knew what needed to be done. We had people in Makespace that run manufacturing facilities and turn out 300,000 units a year, but don't know the first thing about medical devices. Well, a couple of us there did know something about medical devices, but we didn't know about huge volume manufacturing. So one of the first things we did in each one of the projects was we would define who was going to be in charge of communications. And we had one person who, she's not technical, but she says, what I do is I manage people every day. So I'm now going to manage you. And she set up an evening meeting, and it started out with, I think, 4 of us. At one point, there were 24 of us on the call. And largely, it every day was, okay, what happened today? What's the status? How many visors did we do? How many deliveries did we get? What didn't work? What did work? And as we were tossing all these things out, somebody would say, well, I have a solution to that, or I'll suggest something here. And largely, as soon as you suggested it, you owned it and you had to go do it. So there's a bit of kind of social negotiation there. But what we ended up doing was distributing the problems to those people who had experience in solving those types of problems in their day jobs. And you ended up getting that somebody who didn't know anything about medical devices, but did know about manufacturing, then they could bring their experience in manufacturing in. We had one guy who had just finished a PhD in manufacturing production line design. So he did all of our procedures. I don't think once did we get anywhere near the ideal that he had set up, but we kept striving toward what we knew that was the theoretical best, and so we had a delta that we could reference to. So it was a way of bringing the best skills to the problems that faced us each day, and it only worked because it was a very, very flat organization that we ended up with.
I'd like to pick up on Dale's question about a distributed production capability and reflect on the ways in which Care Sleeves as a project might end up being an outsourced innovation and R&D arm for a couple of different viable commercial businesses that exist in the world, but would not have had the wherewithal to do the innovation work the way we've done it. And with I think not just the frugality of it, but the elegance of it. And I think that's there's something to me really quite challenging and interesting there. I've worked in corporate innovation on and off for over a decade. And the ways in which good ideas get mired in bureaucracy when they're too young to fight for themselves is part of, it's part of what defines a good innovation culture from a bad one, is
right.
the reduction of that. But creating the conditions for that where we're all working from our homes and we're all digitally enabled, and our presence is leveled by the structure of a Zoom room. There's no big chair in this room.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Well,
I think I just echo that. I think that's a fantastic observation, and the elegance that you refer to. I think one of the things that we may have discovered in this is that tool for innovation you're referring to. We've created this pool of creative people all the way around the world that are now accessible, know they're creative, and we have tools for helping them interact. So I think that may be one of the greatest outcomes of this. So yes,
Yeah.
I agree with you entirely.
Yeah, I agree.
But this is what I find interesting so much is that, if you take groups like the Open Source Medical Supplies Group, you follow people joining them, they're coming from the corporate world to work in a networked organization because they can get something done, they can contribute, they can do innovation in a different way than inside of the structure they live in, whether it's a government bureaucracy or a corporate. And I think, obviously people will go back to their day jobs at various points here, but I think there is something here as a new collaborative process on global scale for innovation that actually doesn't have to have the same filters that a business or even a government applies to whether something, comes into being. It can be based on real need and needs of one or small numbers. So I find that fascinating.
this has been a truly very interesting and insightful discussion. I'm aware that we're creeping past 8:30 now in the UK. So I think we should draw this to a close, but really a huge thanks to everyone who's participated, everyone who's listening, especially our speakers. Personally, I've found following the maker community over the last few months a really inspiring time in this very challenging period. And it's definitely given us a lot to think about. Valeria and we've been tracking some of the maker responses to COVID-19, and we're very happy to communicate and connect with anybody who's doing the same. So really a huge thanks as well to Dale and Jennifer and everyone at Make for facilitating this great conversation.
Well, thank you, Lucia and Valeria. We appreciate you helping to organize and bring these groups together. Fascinating stories, real important work, and it's wonderful to get a glimpse into it. So I really appreciate everyone getting together today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.